who they had claimed, discovered visual evidence that Drake could have had ties to the same organization as a co-defendant in this case, Robert Allen. And I believe the brief states, Dr. Cruz's research revealed photos of Mr. Graham throwing the same gang signs as Allen, and Allen is that accomplice who I mentioned before who testified against his co-defendants. But Cruz also revealed that people who knew Drake were allegedly seen in XXXTentacion's neighborhood threatening him before he died. The brief reads, social media posts showed these same known Graham associates were seen in Onfroy's neighborhood threatening him just prior to the murder. And then they say even more revealing is this connection that Cruz made to Drake's song lyrics, because shortly after XXX was killed, the brief writes, Mr.